This is my son, Christian Swimp. He was born March 28, 2016. I'm his father, Stacy Swimp. Please take some time to listen to Christian's story. This is a story of injustice, abuse, and neglect. This is a story of systemic failure. From the age of 1.5, Christian has tested positive for cocaine and marijuana exposure 6 times. That's right, 6 times. And unfortunately, the family court, Child Protective Services, and even the Flint Police Department have decided that this is not harmful or dangerous to him. This all started back in August of 2017. During the late summer of 2017, my son started coming to me smelling like marijuana. Not sure what to do about it because I couldn't just make an accusation without having some proof. I reached out to a friend of mine who said that I should have him tested with what's called a hair follicle environmental exposure test. Now at the time, I didn't know what that was. And she explained that this is a child guard test. A child guard test that many abuse and neglect agencies across the country are using in order to determine whether someone is using narcotics near their children or whether a child has been consistently exposed to a drug-related environment. And so upon doing some research, I found out about a company called About My Health, which is based out of Illinois. But it just so happens that they had a certified collection site in Troy, Michigan that I took my son to late August of 2017. They collected my son's hair. A week later, they called me up. About My Health called me up and said, Mr. Swimp, we have some really bad news for you. We're sorry to tell you that your son tested positive for cocaine and marijuana exposure. I can't tell you how surprised, how shocked, how angry, and how very disappointed I was that he also tested positive for cocaine. So the first thing that I did was I called Child Protective Services because after all, I thought that's what they're there to do, protect my son. And then I called the attorney who I had at the time, Patrick Chatterton. Within 24 hours, Child Protective Services called me. A CPS worker by the name of Kelsey Cross called me up and said, Mr. Swimp, we're going to open up a case. And she asked me that I have the test results so that I could email to them. And I forwarded to them the email that About My Health sent to me. I went down to the police department and I filed a complaint of child abuse and neglect against my son's mother because I don't smoke marijuana, I don't do drugs, and I don't hang around anybody that does drugs. I kept my son for 2 weeks until I could get into the courtroom to have an emergency hearing to remove him from that situation. And so sometime around September the 18th or 19th of 2017, we had an emergency hearing in front of Judge F.K. Beam, who was our family court judge at that time. To my shock, Judge F.K. Beam absolutely ignored the drug tests. She ignored the ex parte motion, the emergency motion by my then attorney, Patrick Chatterton, saying that exposure to cocaine and marijuana did not mean that my son was in any imminent danger or harm. Yes, you heard that right. The family court judge said that cocaine and marijuana exposure was not going to harm my son imminently. In other words, at no point would he be in some danger from that. Both my attorney and I were stunned. But the judge didn't stop there. She chastised me for keeping my son from his mother for 2 weeks. Then she told me, I'm going to show you what that feels like, Mr. Swimp. And she said that I was not going to see my son for 2 weeks. And she told the mother that I would be releasing the child to her. And she did order that the mother, myself, and the child would take drug tests. Well, guess what? The mother came out positive for marijuana. I came out negative for all drugs. And my son came out positive for cocaine and marijuana exposure. And yet the judge still didn't go back and grant the emergency removal of my son from that situation. So then we fast forward 30 days. I still hadn't heard anything else from Child Protective Services. We're getting into the first week of October of 2017. So I went down to the police department in Flint, Michigan, and I demanded to know why I had not heard anything from whoever was in charge of child abuse and neglect. And I said to them that, listen, I'm not leaving here today until someone tells me something. My son is a baby. You mean to tell me that his life is not worth a phone call to me from someone from child abuse and neglect in this department who cares about kids? I mean, that's inexcusable. So the next day I got a call from Detective Mary Buzak. And she says to me, "Hi, this is Detective Mary Buzak. I need you to come take a polygraph test." And I couldn't understand why this officer was asking me to take a polygraph test because I came to the police department for help. I didn't know what to do. I said, "Ma'am, why are you talking to me like I'm a criminal? Like I'm a suspect when I came to the police department for protection for my child?" And she says, "Because you are a suspect." Then she hung up on me. I called my attorney, Patrick Chatterton, and told him what had happened. And he said to me, what I later found out to be the worst advice he could have possibly given me. He said, "Go ahead and take the polygraph test. You don't do drugs, Stacy. You don't have anything to hide," which I didn't. And so Mary Buzak calls me back eventually. And she asked me again, was I going to take the polygraph test? And I said, "Sure, I don't have anything to hide." The gentleman who was interviewing me talked to me for at least 2.5 to 3 hours. I mean, I was sweating by the time he was done. It was hot in there. And after grilling me and asking me all these questions, most of which had nothing to do with why we were there, then he hooks me up and I take this polygraph test. And after we were done, he says to me, "You failed the polygraph test." I looked at him and I said, "Listen, I don't understand what's going on with your test. I know this, I don't do drugs." It just so happened that I had spent hundreds of dollars and I had taken voluntarily the same environmental exposure test that my son had taken. And I had already given this information to Detective Mary Buzak. I had already given this information to CPS. I had already given this information to my attorney. So I said to them, "I don't really care what your polygraph test says. I don't do drugs." And he says, "Okay, you're free to leave." Well, as I go out to the lobby and I get ready to leave, there are 2 police officers there. And they say to me, "You're under arrest for child endangerment." And I couldn't believe it. I was stunned. And I said to the officer, "What are you talking about? I don't do drugs." And he says, "You don't do drugs?" I said, "That's what I said. I don't do drugs." "Are you talking about a polygraph test? You guys arrested me for this?" And he says, "Look, I need you to put your hands on the wall." And out of nowhere, this detective, Mary Buzak, she comes and she's screaming and she's cursing me and yelling, and I'm stunned at the entire situation. And I said to her, "Ma'am, you're making a mistake today. And why are you talking to me like that? You're supposed to be an officer of the law." They arrested me, they handcuffed me, took me downtown, kept me sitting around for 45 minutes to an hour. Detective Mary Buzak finally gets downtown and she says, "Do you want to talk to me, Swim?" And I say, "I don't have anything to hide." She takes me in a room. And the moment we get in this room, she says to me, "You don't have a right to come down here and tell me how to do my job." And I say to her, "So this is what this is about? That's why I'm here?" She says, "To my attorneys, read your Miranda rights." I said, "No, they didn't." She said, "I'm sure they did." I said, "No, I'm sure they didn't." So she grilled me for an hour and a half or so, cussing me out, making all these accusations, basically poking at me. And when it was all said and done, she said I was free to go. Well, just a few days later, I get a text from CPS worker Kelsey Cross at about 1:30 telling me that there was going to be a hearing at 2:30 that day to remove my son from me. I couldn't believe it. And I ran downtown and I got there as fast as I could. And once I arrived, she hands me a petition with all these malicious things, accusing me of stalking, domestic violence, all these crazy things. But ironically, she didn't accuse me at the time of exposing my son to drugs. But they were looking for something because they just didn't want me to have custody of my son in that situation. They didn't want me to be able to protect him. So during this hearing, Patrick Chatterton came and voluntarily represented me that day. And he said to the referee, my client didn't do anything. And these allegations, this is ridiculous. These are coming from the mother's family member. But the referee decided, Ariana Heath, that she was going to allow them to take my child from me. You know why? Because in the petition it said that the mother and I got into an argument at her OBGYN's appointment when she was about 4 or 5 months pregnant. You heard that right. They took my son from me for 11 months. For 11 months. And what they wouldn't listen to, what they didn't care about, was the reason why we were having a discussion, an argument that day, is because she had tested positive for an STD while she was carrying my child. I think I had a reason to be concerned. But that wasn't child abuse and neglect. Fast forward. 3 or 4 weeks later, we have a hearing. And CPS said to the judge they wanted to amend the petition against me to terminate my parental rights. To terminate my parental rights. The CPS worker, Kelsey Cross, said in the petition that it is believed, she didn't say who believes it, she didn't say they had any proof, she said it is believed that Stacy Swimp intentionally ingested Christian Swimp with cocaine and marijuana. And to add insult to injury, that CPS worker and what they call a guardian ad litem, Tarina Cart, recommended to the court that my son be placed back with his mother, though they knew for sure that she was using marijuana because she tested positive for marijuana. And mind you, at the time, marijuana was not recreational legal. And it came out during the hearing that she had just applied for a medical marijuana card. And she started giggling and laughing when that was stated. What does that mean? That means that my son had tested positive weeks before the mother even applied for a medical marijuana card. That's what that means. And yet they still put him back in that environment. Her boyfriend, her other 2 children's father, was on probation for cocaine distribution. He had not been out of prison even 7 months. He had not cooperated with CPS. And he was basically living part-time in that home. And yet they said, put the child back in that home. And for the next 11 months, I had to fight against them trying to terminate my parental rights, against them treating me like I was a drug addict, though I had never failed a drug test. For 11 months, they had me going down to DHS and visiting my child under supervised visitation as though I were a drug addict. And my son, whenever they would take him from me, he would hold on to me and cry and scream and kick. And I had to just sit there and take it, knowing I hadn't done anything wrong. I spent my entire life savings on attorneys trying to fight this injustice. And finally, after asking and asking and asking and asking, 11 months later, Judge F.K. Beam finally relented and ordered that my son be given another hair follicle environmental test. Because they were so sure, for some reason, that it was going to come out negative because of the malicious lies that were told about me by the CPS worker, Kelsey Cross. And because of the allegations by this corrupt officer, Mary Buzzek. But I'm here to tell you that that test result came back positive for cocaine and marijuana exposure. Now, what was the excuse? Because I didn't have my son for 11 months. He wasn't in my care. He didn't have any overnight with me. He wasn't in my home for 11 months. So now what was the excuse? So CPS then dropped the charges against me in August of 2018. And then they began to pursue a petition against my son's mother to remove my son from her home. And when they did that, now the same referee, Ariana Heath, Now the same Judge F.K. Beam, now the same guardian ad litem, Tarina Cart, were all saying that exposure to cocaine and marijuana is not child abuse. Now that they knew it was the mother who was culpable, they were all saying no harm, no foul. They dismissed the petition. And the mother walked out of the room laughing. And I sat there crying. CPS said to me, don't worry, we're going to appeal this. The assistant prosecutor, Jay Polis, wrote an excellent appeal to this decision and submitted it to Judge F.K. Beam. And in this appeal, he said this was criminality. And he pointed out to the judge the double standard of the court. He pointed out to the judge how they were saying things now that they weren't saying before. He pointed out to the judge that the mother was 100% responsible for the care of the child for the 11 months that they wrongfully kept them from me. And the mother, during the hearing, said to the court that she was spending 50% of the time with our son and the other 50% with her parents. She alleged that her apartments out there in Ridgecrest Apartments were sharing vents with other people. And she was saying that she thinks maybe the cocaine and marijuana exposure may have been coming from the neighbors. Or she said maybe Stacy rubbed his hair with cocaine and marijuana during a supervised visits. Yes, they actually tried that, but it didn't work. Judge F.K. Beam dismissed the appeal of the prosecutor, Jay Polis, saying that it's not child abuse and neglect, that this child has been exposed to cocaine and marijuana is not child abuse and neglect as long as he's not injured. As long as he's meeting all of his developmental milestones. Basically what this judge, F.K. Beam, was saying was, let's wait until he's suffering from some brain damage or some sort of a developmental delay, or let's wait until he's dead. Let's wait until something tragic happens before we consider the possible harm of cocaine and marijuana exposure to this toddler. Yes, she actually said that. It's in black and white. And I'm going to be uploading these documents for all of you to see. Everything that I'm saying today is fact, supported by documentation. Fast forward now to June of this year, 2019. My son kept coming to me smelling in such a way that it was giving me a headache. And so I took him to a DHS certified laboratory. It's called LADS on Dordt Highway. That means that they have a contract with DHS in the court system to test people for drugs. I took my son Christian to this laboratory. It came back positive for cocaine and marijuana exposure, yet again. I called CPS. I talked to his pediatrician. The pediatrician called CPS because by this time, my son was suffering from wheezing. He was constantly wheezing and coughing. It had been going on for a few months. I was scared. I was afraid what was happening to my child. And I noticed some things wasn't right about his speech. And I wasn't sure whether or not this was being caused by the drugs because I'm not a doctor, but I knew something was wrong. I took my son to Helen DeVos Pediatric Pulmonary Center in Grand Rapids because I wanted to know, is he being affected by exposure to this narcotics, or what are the risks? What's going on here? What are the possibilities? And they said that he was at great risk, in spite of what the judge, F.K. Beam, said, in spite of what Ariana Heath said, in spite of what Judge Elizabeth Kelly, who's now the judge, said, because once she took over this case, she then began to uphold all of F.K. Beam's decision, saying my colleague had already ruled on this stuff. I'm not dealing with that. Basically, she was saying the same thing, that my son being exposed to cocaine and marijuana is not harmful to him. But the pediatrician in Ann Arbor said differently. The pediatrician in Grand Rapids said differently. I took my son to Shelby Pediatrics Lung Center They said he was in grave danger. But yet CPS yet again failed my son. They assigned someone by the name of Lacey Benjamin to this case. She took almost 3 weeks before she even began really talking to any of the doctors. She made no real sincere effort to help my son. And when it was all said and done, she had the nerve, CPS had the audacity to say that they think I might be abusing my son by taking him to all of these pediatric specialists. They said that they think maybe that was mental abuse to him and somehow harassment of his mother. Unbelievable. Of course, they knew that was nonsense, so they never opened up a case, but they certainly verbalized that to me. And I was disgusted. And it's getting even worse, because now my son is being exposed to domestic violence. In May of 2019, my son started telling me that his mother's significant other was hitting his mother. He would say, "Daddy, Big Aunt hit Mommy," and he would motion to show me how he was doing it. Big Aunt is a nickname for Anthony. And I would never ask my son anything about what was going on in that place, because when I'm with him, my responsibility is to be with him and focus on our time. He was just out of nowhere, just bring this stuff up. And he would bring it up around other people, such as the home visitor from the SKIP program, when we were together doing home projects. He would just bring it up out of nowhere. And then on July 2nd, I get a phone call from my son's mother after she had been texting me all morning, telling me, "You're not going to believe what's happened. I can't believe this has happened. Oh, Stacy, if you knew what was happening, you'd be outraged." So thinking something had happened to my son, I'm like, "Please call me, tell me what's going on." And I recorded it because I had to. Every time she says one thing, she will turn around and say she didn't say it. So, especially because I thought she was going to tell me something had happened to my son, I wanted to record it.
I came home. This man came into my house and he jumped on my son. And it took every bit of strength I had to help my son.
Is little Ann okay?
Yeah.
All right.
Struck me in my face so hard.
He hit you too?
Yeah.
Okay. This is it. Do you hear me? This is it. No more.
I couldn't believe it. Couldn't believe it, but I couldn't let him attack my son and not help my child. As a mother, and I was messed up. I've been bleeding like crazy overnight.
I need you to go to the hospital, please. And I need to be able to talk to you, Nicole, please. Can I talk to you? Because it's got me thinking about when I was telling you yesterday when Christian was telling me and Miss Sherry that he hit you, and I'm thinking, well, maybe he's, and you know this is true because you've been down this road before. Once a man hits you like that, I mean, then you guys have a history, then he'll feel comfortable doing it again. This man will kill you or hurt you eventually. Do you understand me?
If I let him, it will happen. And you're absolutely right. I'm not blind.
Yet again, I filed a motion to get custody of my son, to get him out of that situation so he could be safe. And Judge Elizabeth Kelly, she would not even allow me to play the proof in the courtroom that my son had been exposed to domestic violence. She completely ignored it. I'm doing this video and I'm putting this message out there because I'm crying out for justice on behalf of my son. I'm crying out for systemic change on behalf of all children who are exposed to a system that doesn't seem to value the life of a child over the rights of a parent who they might be biased toward. This is not about a custody case. Please consider, even if I had primary custody of my son, what difference would it make if his mother is continuing to expose him to narcotics and domestic violence? So this is not about custody. This is about justice. This is about his safety. This is about his future. And I know that this is all, it sounds so unbelievable. It sounds so just out there. And that's why I'm providing documentation for anyone watching this so that you can take the time and click the links provided to you and read the CPS reports, read the judge's opinion, the referee's opinion, see the opinions of the doctors. So I'm providing documentation. And the call to action that I give to anyone watching this is to call the Chief Justice of the Genesee County Court and demand that he look into this situation. To contact the Judiciary Tenure Commission and demand that they do justice on behalf of Christian Swim. And most of all, I'm asking that you pray for us and pray for my son, because I believe that prayer is important as a Christian. Pray that justice on my son's behalf will be done. Thank you for taking the time to watch this, and thank you for your prayers and your support.
Yes, Jesus loves me. Yes, Jesus loves me. Yes, Jesus loves me. For the Bible tells me so. Amen. Say amen.